Latest sign of growing political and economic uncertainty across the country?
Airlines say that Canadians are starting to vacation instead of right here in the United States.
Canadians are increasingly choosing not to cross the border into the United States, and the shift is hitting border communities hard. What used to be busy crossings and weekend getaways now look quiet and empty. Small towns that once lived off Canadian visitors are seeing shops close, hotels slash rates, and billboards advertising emergency discounts. Across wide stretches of the northern border, roads that used to hum with traffic are now marked by long stretches of unused lanes and storefronts with for sale signs. The numbers tell the same story people are seeing on the ground. In just a few months, travel from Canada to the US plunged dramatically. Same-day returns in May 2025 dropped by about 40.3% year over year, and overnight travel fell by 34.3%, continuing a multi-month downward trend. Car crossings are down roughly 35%, and in some areas, hotel bookings have collapsed by as much as 73%. Those declines are not just short-term blips. They point to a deeper change in how Canadians view their closest neighbor. This isn't limited to vacations. Permanent moves and long-term migration from Canada to the US are also shrinking. Once a steady stream of professionals packed up and moved south for bigger paychecks and more job chances, but that flow has slowed. The number of Canadian-born people who became permanent residents in the US fell from about 15,600 in the late 2000s to roughly 10,900 by the late 2010s, a drop of around 30%. In May, the provinces that normally send the most people south showed the biggest declines. Quebec and British Columbia each saw drops in the low 50s, while Ontario fell by more than a third. Those provincial numbers matter because they cover Canada's largest population and economic centers. When skilled workers and families from Montreal, Vancouver, and Toronto decide not to take US offers, the loss goes beyond a canceled vacation or an unmade purchase. It affects universities, hospitals, research labs, startups, and the small towns that relied on visitors to pay salaries and keep businesses open. Real estate agents in border regions report properties that used to sell in days now sit on the market for months. Resorts that once depended on Canadian guests for the majority of their summer income suddenly see bookings dry up. The effects are visible in specific border towns. Places like Sweetgrass, Montana, and Pembina, North Dakota, once busy border stations, now process only a trickle of local traffic and commercial trucks. Cafes that served visiting truckers close on weekends. Gas stations cut hours. Shops shutter. When a single canceled group tour can wipe out tens of thousands in revenue for a local lodging provider, the fragility of these economies becomes obvious. Those losses ripple outward. Construction slows. Healthcare and retirement facilities lose winter residents, and colleges see fewer enrollments from Canadian students. All of these changes add up, and they add up fast. Part of the shift shows up in where Canadians choose to travel. Overseas trips are up, with more people flying to Europe or Asia instead of driving south. The share of all Canadian trips that went to overseas destinations rose from 26.9% in April 2024 to 36.1% in 2025. In short, Canadians are still traveling. They just aren't going to the United States. That preference change is partly cultural and partly practical. Worries about healthcare costs in the US, concerns over gun violence, and a sense of political uncertainty have made many Canadians rethink whether the benefits of moving or traveling to the US outweigh the risks. Economists and local leaders describe this as more than a short-lived cooling-off period. For decades, border proximity meant easy cross-border work, family visits, and shopping trips. 2/3 of Canadians live within a short drive of the US border, and for generations that closeness translated into strong economic and social ties. Now a new generation looks at the US and sees risk rather than reward. Surveys suggest that a large share of younger Canadians have no interest in living in the United States under any circumstances. When people in their prime working years decide to stay put, the long-term consequences for cross-border labor markets and innovation are real. That reversal of the brain drain is already noticeable in the data. Returning Canadian-born individuals and returning permanent residents were more likely to be of prime working age and to hold higher education degrees than earlier cohorts. In recent years, a larger share of people who might once have left for US jobs are choosing to stay in Canada, and many Americans are also moving north. For the first time in modern history, Migration flows between the two countries are roughly balanced in some measures. Talent and investment are following the people who choose to stay. The economic cost to U.S. border states is steep. Canadian tourists contributed an estimated $20 billion to the U.S. economy last year and supported about 140,000 jobs. Even a small percentage drop in Canadian travel spending translates into billions of lost dollars for regional economies. When car crossings fall by a third and hotel occupancy plunges by more than half in some places, local tax bases shrink, seasonal workers lose jobs, and whole service sectors feel the strain. Local officials and regional development agencies are scrambling for fixes. Some tourism boards launched aggressive discount programs to lure Canadians back, with offers like 30% off hotel stays and free recreational rentals. Welcome centers and highway signage in several states are being updated to include bilingual messaging in hopes of re-establishing cultural ties. But those moves can only do so much if the underlying reasons Canadians are avoiding the U.S. Safety concerns, healthcare worries, and political unease persist. Infrastructure built for cross-border traffic now stands underused. Modern border plazas, immigration offices staffed around the clock, duty-free shops, and exchange booths that once thrived on steady traffic are quieter by the month. Maintaining those facilities still costs money. Federal and state agencies that invested in border economics now face the prospect of watching their investments underperform as traffic patterns change. The pattern is not uniform across the map. Some states and towns may adapt more quickly, shifting their focus to domestic or overseas visitors, diversifying their economies, or courting different kinds of investment. Others may struggle, especially places that lacked economic diversity before the decline in Canadian visitors. States with many crossing points, like Maine and Vermont, which have dozens of land crossings with Quebec and New Brunswick, find themselves operating numerous facilities that now handle far fewer people. For those local economies, the challenge is existential: reinvent themselves or face shrinking populations and fewer job opportunities. The shift also carries a human side that's easy to miss in the statistics. For decades, families had members living on both sides of the border. People could shop, work, and socialize across the line with little thought. Now, stories of individuals turning down U.S. job offers or canceling summer road trips are common. One software engineer declines a Silicon Valley role. A teacher cancels a Maine trip. A retired couple sells a winter home in Florida and decides to remain in Canada year-round. When those personal choices multiply, they reshape whole communities. Policymakers in both countries are paying attention. In Canada, government agencies released a border plan in December 2024, focused on reducing unnecessary border volumes, increasing information sharing, and curbing non-genuine visitors. That approach makes official what many people were already doing in practice, cutting back on border crossings that don't feel essential. Meanwhile, local leaders in U.S. border states must decide whether to double down on incentives, rethink regional economies, or accept that a new normal has arrived. If the trend continues, the long-term picture by 2035 could look very different from the past. Cross-border traffic could return only slowly, leaving behind infrastructure built for a busier world and towns that must find fresh sources of income. The demographic map of North America could shift as more talent chooses to remain in Canada and as investment follows those choices. For towns that once relied on Canadian visitors, that future forces a hard choice: adapt or decline. What matters now is how communities respond. Some are already trying creative fixes, multilingual outreach, targeted discounts, and new marketing campaigns to attract different visitor groups. Others are seeking to diversify beyond tourism, investing in local industries and remote work infrastructure to attract residents who don't rely on cross-border commerce. Those efforts may help blunt the immediate impact, but they can't instantly replace the traffic and jobs lost when millions of people change long-standing travel and migration habits. At the end of the day, the quiet lanes and empty plazas are more than a local nuisance. They are visible signs of a larger cultural and economic shift. Canadians are reassessing what living close to the United States means, and many are concluding that proximity no longer guarantees opportunity. Whether that change is temporary or permanent depends on a mix of policy choices, economic conditions, and how each country addresses the concerns pushing people to stay home. For now, Border towns on both sides are left to reckon with the consequences and to find ways to survive in a world where neighbors are no longer taking the short trip across the line.